Hey everyone, just a real quick note before we start tonight's show with our good friend Tim Hauraney from the TSN Racing Pod to help us break down all the action from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix this past weekend. But I just want to let you all know that about a week and a half ago, we had a major failure of some of our very important hardware here in the studio. And while it meant that we didn't lose any time recording or releasing the podcast episodes we wanted to, it has meant that I've had to spend quite a significant amount of time setting up the studio, resetting up all the settings in the software to help capture and process the best possible audio quality that we're capable of with the resources that we have. Now, having said that, I still think that the audio of this episode and maybe the last one, it was okay. Not quite up to our usual good standards, and it definitely does not take away from the content or the quality of the content that you're going to hear over the next hour or so. Anyways, I just wanted to throw it out there in case some of you noticed that it wasn't quite as good as usual. And now that everything is basically back to 100%, we should be back to normal for the next weekly show that will drop in a couple of days on Thursday night. Anyhow, that's it for me. Enjoy the show. All right, guys, welcome back. Mark Daly, Mark Hamilton, and the host of the TSN Racing Pod, Tim Hauraney, here to break down all the action from Sunday's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. A lot going on around the streets of Baku City over the weekend. Boys, how's it going?
Yeah, good, man. Thanks very much for having me on. This is a lot of fun. We always chop it up after the races usually, so usually we're in for an entertaining ride here.
Oh, this is going to be a fun one. I can tell just by like the expectant look on everybody's faces here that we're just going to dive into it. So I'm going to get the homework out of the way first, because we should just go down the race classification, and then this maybe sets up a little context. So the top 10 finishers at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix: Max Verstappen winning, Sergio Perez, George Russell on the podium, Lewis Hamilton. We're going to talk a little bit about Lewis tonight, because that was one heck of a drive and probably the most difficult fourth place Lewis has ever earned in his career. Pierre Gasly fifth for AlphaTauri, Sebastian Vettel and the Aston Martin coming home sixth, Fernando Alonso seventh for Alpine, Danny Ricciardo and Lando Norris for the two McLarens in eighth and ninth, and Esteban Ocon rounding out the top 10. So for those of you who didn't watch the race, you're probably wondering, well, what happened to Carlos Sainz and what happened to Charles Leclerc? So out of 4 DNFs in the race this Sunday, they were all either Ferrari works teams or they were Ferrari customer cars. So the two Ferrari powered cars that did finish the race didn't actually finish in the points. That was Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo, and then Mick Schumacher in the other Haas. And it was the two Ferraris themselves that did not finish, and, well, Charles Leclerc that spectacularly blew up driving down the start-finish straight. So let's just get right into it before we talk about the broader implications in the World Championship now. Guys, what the heck is wrong with Ferrari? We thought starting after the first couple of races, Charles, he won 2 out of the first 3. He hasn't won a race since. He's had 6 out of the 8 poles for the race for the races this year. They are just not converting it. They're dropping points on the track. They're having bad things happening on the track, in the pits, on the pit wall. It's just all going wrong. And I don't know if, just speaking for myself personally, if I was Charles Leclerc, I would not be a happy camper right now, because they are bleeding points big time in the championship, which is starting to look like it's going to be a bit of a cakewalk for Red Bull unless they can drastically turn this thing around ASAP. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a tough one for Ferrari and all Ferrari powered cars this weekend. I mean, there was, Carlos Sainz, he had said after the race it was a hydraulic issue that sent him off. I know we said that, the brake pedal or a brake by wire issue or something like that over the team radio, but he had said in the bullpen afterwards that it was a hydraulic issue. For K-Mag, he had no clue what was going on there. And, for Charles himself, I mean, he was very frustrated, obviously, and then we all heard him on Sky Sports. I think, this is 4 polls, Hammy, that he hasn't converted into W's. And, one of them, actually, none of them are really his fault, aside from the fact that the Red Bull was just better race pace in some of the races. And then, yes, he had that issue in Spain, and then Ferrari blundered in Monaco. But for the most part, Leclerc is doing his job.
Yeah, he absolutely is. I mean, he's had pole since Miami. He had again in Spain. He had in Monaco. He went crazy there on Saturday to get pole for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And again, I mean, just more points left out on the track. If you look at the drivers' championship, you got Max on top with 150 points. You got Sergio 129. You got Charles, who's 116. I mean, he's like, Max has got a race win and then some in his pocket between himself and Charles Leclerc. I mean, his only main contender at the moment would be Sergio, who's been driving lights out over the last several races. I mean, arguably, or I don't think that there is any argument there. I mean, Sergio is driving in the form of his career. He's peaking at the right time. He's got a great car. He's in a great place mentally. He's also got a 2-year contract, so he can just focus on what he needs to do. But Charles, I mean, he's starting to lose distance. I mean, going into this weekend, you had George Russell's coming in with 84 points. He's got on 99 points. He's only 17 points behind Charles Leclerc. I mean, if you're George Russell, okay, points are a little bit harder to come by. You're not getting those firsts and seconds, but you got to think that George has his eyes all over Charles Leclerc. Mark, what is your assessment of the situation?
Daily, you hit it on the nail on the head a couple of minutes ago when you said it's not just a couple of small things that are going wrong for Ferrari. If you look back the last 3 races, the last 6, the last 8, it's everything. It's pit stops, it's strategy. Remember, Charles qualified on pole at Monaco, his home race 2 weeks ago. He gets that robbed away from him because of terrible strategy, which I think a lot of us are still trying to dissect and trying to understand. Of course, this race was stolen from him from a power unit perspective, but the issues here, the implications for what happened today reverberate far beyond simply the points that were lost in the championships, right? You look at this, Charles Leclerc is already on his 3rd turbocharger of the year. If you look at the regulations, you're allowed 3 internal combustion engines, 3 MGUHs, 3 MGUKs, 2 battery stores, 3 turbochargers, and 8 exhaust. He's now burned through 3 turbochargers, which means he's got to somehow go back and pull a turbocharger out of a power unit that they've already written off, wed it to the existing power unit, and get it ready for Canada. So you're in a position here now where if he can't get those parts ready and he needs to move on to a 4th turbocharger, here we are halfway through the season, he's going to start taking grid penalties. So it's not just bad enough that they're coughing up, choking, hemorrhaging points in the championship and costing their lead driver wins in a race for the World Drivers' Championship. The reliability is going to start costing them grid penalties because there's so many of these parts are so tightly regulated in the technical regulations. Like, it's a terrible place for this team to be in. And I feel horrendous for Charles because, like Tim said, you cannot ask anything more from him. He is delivering in every conceivable way for this team. Like you said, how many poles has he scored this year? 6 in 8 races. That is phenomenal. And in any other circumstance, he should be leaving the Drivers' Championship. And he's not. He's 3rd in the Drivers' Championship because Ferrari can't tee up a car that demonstrates any degree of reliability. And in the odd race where they do, they rob the points from him with their terrible strategy.
Well, that's the thing, right? And Tim, I'm going to put this question to you because there's no easy questions when it comes to Ferrari. The drivers have made mistakes out on the track. They've made bad calls on the pit wall. Reliability is a big issue. So if you get the call from Maranello tomorrow, where do you start to turn this ship around? Because none of these are quick or easy fixes. As Mark just so nicely pointed out, I mean, if you're going through the scrap heap just to put, try and build some Frankenstein PU to get to Montreal next week, and we're only a quarter way through the darn season, that is a nasty, nasty place to be in.
Yeah, the loss of this power unit, I mean, that's huge, right? I mean, just to have to lose that, and then Hammy made a great point. They're going to have to go back and get an older turbo that they've run earlier in the season and slap that on, and you got to hope that doesn't fail, because if it does in Canada, like, you're in a lot of trouble, and you're coming to Canada, which is a power track. Like, they are heading to a power track with Frankenstein parts bolted to this engine. I mean, it's not a good sign for Ferrari. I mean, this isn't good. I mean, obviously Red Bull had their reliability issues at the beginning of the season, but they were able to figure that out. The problem with what's happening with Ferrari is that they're running straight up to that line of grid penalties. And like new turbos, like Mark was saying, like that's a 10-place grid penalty, man. Like that's a huge penalty to take. And this isn't an easy series for you to make that up, right? Like you just can't go and make up that deficit within a race, not unless something like monumental happens and they're able to claw their way back. I mean, we have to give credit to what Matteo Binotto has done, turning this team around. I mean, obviously taking control of everything. And what was it? I think it was like January 2019 or something like that. I mean, you have to take your hat off to him because he has done a great job at turning the team around. The problem is that there's still a lot of these like gremlins that are just hanging around. Like, oh my God, with Ferrari, you just never know. You don't know what you're going to get out of them when the race starts. They show up, they get qualifying done. Leclerc does his job, the team does theirs, and then strategy goes out the window when the race starts. And so does now reliability. I mean, if you're Charles Leclerc and you're going through, team debrief tonight after this race, I mean, you got to be livid. You have to be.
Tim, sorry, I was just going to say, just on that reliability piece, and this isn't something that I came up with on my own, but Sam Collins made a really great point post-race during one of the post-race review shows today, and I thought it's worth sharing. I think as most of our listeners probably know, the current engine formula is largely frozen. It's almost completely homologated. However, there are exceptions within the technical regulations at this point that allow teams to introduce new parts to the power unit under the guise of improving reliability. So the reality here is that even though the engine formula is almost completely homologated, they're allowed to identify problematic components and improve them if it's being driven by a reliability issue. And the reality is reliability and performance sometimes go hand in hand. So while you look at the championship standings that Daly so kindly spoke to a couple of minutes ago, and they're now chasing Red Bull by 80 points in the constructor standings, and that's going to be an absolute mountain to overcome. The reality is the regulations allow them to, if they can, identify the problematic components within that power unit and replace them. So they are not stricken to running this problematic, unreliable power unit indefinitely. Though again, the cost cap will have implications there as well.
But then we also have to wonder if it's like, is this packaging? Like, is it a packaging issue that they're running into? Right. Things are overheating. Like, is that what it is? I mean, because that's a bit more of a easier fix, but at the same point, it's like, this isn't something that's going to be fixed overnight. Like by the time we get to Canada, there's not going to be like a solution. It's one of these things where it's just hold on for dear life and hope that you don't get another mechanical DNF. So I think like there's that also to take a look at. I mean, reliability is an easier fix than, let's say, aero performance. That takes a way longer. But for the reliability side of things, it's a little easier to come by. The only problem is it doesn't take like a week. It takes like weeks.
Well, that's just the thing. And the implications in the championships are a lot more dire when you get away from the driver's side to the constructor's side, because as Hammy just pointed out, there's like an 80-point gap between Red Bull and Ferrari right now. Red Bull currently on 279 points, Ferrari 199 points. All of a sudden, Mercedes is on 161 points. I mean, they're picking up points where they can. They're not in the form of first and second, but I mean, they're picking them up. They're closing that gap for Ferrari, because I mean, if you look at the results through the first 8 races, you had Max and Sergio who didn't finish. They had the double DNF in Bahrain. You had Max who retired in Australia, and then since then Max has had 4 wins, a third, and then Sergio since Australia has had 3 seconds, a fourth and a first. And then you look at Charles, he's had a 6 at Imola. He had a second in Miami. He retired in Spain. He had a fourth in Monaco, and then he retired today. So, I mean, there's no wonder that there's so much daylight, between the two teams now. And I think that if you're Ferrari, you got to be like just in a state of almost panic, because if you're Red Bull on the other side, you've got to think that you're in a pretty good place, because 3 races into the season, we're like, well, what's going on with Red Bull? They obviously have a good car. What they brought over and designed for this year is still a very competitive package. That we know the Honda engine or the Red Bull powertrain, whatever it is a good engine, and they just don't have the reliability. Now you fast forward 5 races after that, it's completely flipped around. And if you're Red Bull, you have to think, okay, we had our struggles in the beginning, but we're trending in the right direction. Ferrari's regressing. Mercedes is picking up points, but nowhere in a place that is threatening to us. The only issue, if you want to call it that, at the moment is the inter-team battle between Max and Sergio, which, if you look at the delta between the two of them at Baku today, was a bit of a non-factor. I mean, Sergio looked great in Spain. I mean, they were like, I think that was a fair discussion to have about switching the cars around there. I mean, he obviously wins in Monaco 2 weeks ago, so that just kind of adds a little bit more fuel to that fire about team orders. But I mean, when Max passed Sergio on the track, he was more than a second faster, and then he extended and pulled away from him. And I think Sergio finished, about 20 something odd seconds behind Max. I mean, they were just light years apart. So, I mean, that to me is about the only discussion at the moment is which, things continue, which Red Bull driver is going to be the one that wins this thing. I mean, and it seems weird to say that 8 races into the season, Tim.
Yeah, it's, one of the things that, Sergio had going for him during qualifying was that, he actually had a car that was more tuned for qualifying, let's call it. When they got into the race, Max had the better race car, which is interesting because all season long, Max has actually had a better race car. And this speaks, I think, volumes to his maturity. And one of the things that, we really do need to take a look at, because for Verstappen, he just seems different this season. After winning that championship, he doesn't get agitated as much easily. He's way calmer, I should say, cooler as well. Like, he seems to be thinking a lot more rather than going on sheer instinct and just, wringing the thing's neck and ending up in the wall or ending up in the side or on top of another car. I mean, for Max this season, it is something that you can really see. He's thinking more big picture than just getting it out there and putting the car on the limit and trying to get pole. I think he knows that they really don't have a car that qualifies well. They have a car that races well. For Sergio, I think he had a really tough time with rear tire degradation. And then after that virtual safety car as well, hearing from him, it was a lot of the do with tire warm up. One of the reasons why Max ended up getting him was just couldn't generate enough heat into the tire to get it to work. And which led to, obviously, I hope I got this. I think I got this right. Led to Verstappen passing him for the lead of the race. So I just think that as a whole, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that Sergio is by no means not a world champion. I think he has what it takes to be a world champion. And some people are really going to disagree with me on that, but believe me, this car is more suited for him. And I think for Sergio, if he can just figure out how to get this car into sort of a better race car, but okay quality condition, yeah, I can definitely see this being a 3-way, maybe even 4-way battle for a world championship.
Let me quote, though, Sergio Perez's race engineer when they were approaching T1 on that long straight. And I quote, "No fighting," which is obviously code for this is team orders. Do not try to block your teammate, who obviously moved through and had significantly better pace. I really do agree with you when you make that comment about Max Verstappen being in a different headspace this year. You see it in the interviews, pre-race, post-race. I think he's approaching the races and he's being far more methodical. I feel like he trusts the car far more than he did last year, even though it's an entirely new chassis and a new aero. I think he trusts the team. And I think you're absolutely right that last year, I think he lacked the trust in the car, in the power unit, and even into the team a little bit, even though he'd been there for a very long time. And I think sometimes that manifested it in the way that he approached the race, which he was racing on his instincts and he was pushing the cars in ways that maybe he shouldn't have. And I think this year, for maybe the first time in his career, he's approaching this, like you said, long term. There's a significant vision here, but it's very much in a team kind of approach that he's listening to the engineers, he's working with the mechanics, he trusts what's happening back at Milton Keynes. And I think that's obviously being reflected in the results. And that said, though, last year was, by any definition, that championship was a slugfest. Race over race, week over week, it was an absolute slugfest. It went back and forth. And of course, it was a nail biter right till the very end. And Lewis had to pull off a miraculous finish over the last 5 or 6 Grand Prix to put himself in a position where he could even win a title in that final race. But I think you're right that he's very different this year. I would not imagine a situation, though, where unless something catastrophic happened to Max Verstappen in terms of his performance, a series of DNFs or terrible performances or some really bad luck from a reliability perspective, where that team would shift its focus and put Sergio in a position where he could chase a championship. I don't think they're willing to give up points to another team, but I can't imagine a situation where they would embrace that as an outcome.
Don't you guys feel that this championship right now is just too nice? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's just too, and I don't want to be like totally negative here, but when it comes down to like a hard fought, drag it out championship, like there's got to be some nasty in there. You know what I mean? Like we got to start seeing like the wheel bumping and the pushback from Sergio or the denials from Leclerc and the blocking from Sainz. Like we got to start seeing a little bit more nasty in this thing, I think, for Max to, I think, really feel under pressure, because like he just seems really, and body language says a lot, but after, qualifying, usually he would kind of be annoyed by where he ended up in quali, but, this time he just seemed very calm, cool, collected, nothing really got to him. It was just kind of like, whatever, get it. We'll see how the race goes and da-da-da. And I think we need a little bit more. Yeah, we need a little more beating and banging going on here to I think really start to unsettle Verstappen.
Well, I think that sorry, Mark, I was just going to say, I think the one phrase that got used a lot during qualifying on the television feed on Saturday was get your elbows out. We need to see elbows out. We need to see handbags. We need to see everything going in there. I mean, because, that was actually really exciting. I mean, to watch those 4 cars battling back and forth. And I mean, come on, like a 1/10 of a second between those, the 2 Ferraris and the 2 Red Bulls. I mean, that was some exciting stuff. And it was just too bad that the most enjoyable, on track action came on Saturday. And I want to take anything away from qualifying. I mean, it was a great show. It's just too bad that the Gremlins robbed us of something similar on Sunday. But I mean, the Red Bulls had the pace because Max, I mean, he even said afterwards that he felt he had the pace to overtake Charles on the track anyways. And it's just that, the Ferrari engine gremlins just did the job for Max. And then once he passed to Sergio, it was just a foregone conclusion. But yeah, I would totally agree. There needs to be a little bit more edge to this. But I'm going to throw this one to you first. I want to talk now a little about Charles Leclerc. So, and maybe try and get into his head a little bit. So maybe I'll throw this one to Tim first of all to get the driver's perspective. And Hammy, you jump in here too whenever you feel fit. So obviously, Charles, it's not going great for him. I mean, he's only got a couple of wins to his name so far. Things seem to be coming. It's like trying to hold, a sandcastle in your hands and watching the sand run through your fingers. It's just like everything he's just turning to, like trying to hold on to is vaporizing at the moment. It's just like, how do you stay focused? I mean, the car, when it's working, is obviously a competitive car. Charles is obviously one of the best drivers out there. I mean, he's a proven race winner. I don't think that it's too much of a stretch of the imagination to suggest that this guy's got what it takes to be a world champion if the circumstances permit. But Tim, I mean, how do you keep focused on this? I mean, this is all stuff that's beyond his control. I mean, that's going to be nagging at him every time he gets in there for, a free practice session, not so much of a big deal, but for quali or for a race. I mean, this is got to be tough for the guy.
Yeah, he has to keep doing his job. I mean, it's super important. And the moment I think he starts to steer away from things that have been working for him throughout a race weekend. The moment he starts going away from that is the moment that he's going to get into to a lot more trouble. So I think for him is just keeping everything the same, keep doing what you're doing, and eventually these things will start to work themselves out. The problem is that when you're a driver, you kind of don't see it that way, right? I mean, it's easier for us as like an outside viewer looking in. It's easy for us to say that, but
sure,
it's very hard because you kind of get your judgment gets clouded, and then you start to think, well, maybe if I go in this direction with setup, it could help with whatever our issues are here. But then that starts a domino effect of it affecting something here, something there, and then it gets into your head, and then it starts to become a mental game. And so it's really easy for a driver to sort of lose their way when things aren't going well for you, because with racing, and you guys know this, it's that once you're kind of in this sort of, you have this dark cloud following you around, if you don't stick to everything that you keep doing, the dark cloud keeps coming after you, and it just doesn't ever go away. And for racing drivers, you have your ups and your downs, but you have to know that the downs won't last forever, and you will start to trend upwards again. And so that would be my only advice for Charles Leclerc, is just to keep everything to what he has been doing and just ride out this storm.
Hammy, you want a piece of that?
Yeah, said after the race, and I'm quoting Charles Leclerc here, I am more than frustrated. Obviously, said Leclerc, the first stint in the beginning, we weren't particularly strong, but towards the end of the stint on the medium, I was catching back Checo. And then obviously there was the virtual safety car, and we decided to take that opportunity to pit. And I think it was the right choice. We were in the lead of the race. I was managing the tires well. We just had to manage the tires and the race till the end, which I think we were definitely in the best position possible to do that. Another DNF, it hurts. We really need to look into that for it not to happen again. I think the circumstances are unique here too, because this isn't a middle of the pack driver who's leading the midfield and chasing points every single week. This is an individual who, if not for these DNFs, would be challenging for, or if not leading, the World Drivers' Championship. And I think the good news is, if there's some good news here, we still have 5 races until the summer break. So there's an opportunity for this team to course correct and get Charles Leclerc into a better state of mind. I think the most damaging thing would be for them to be heading into the summer break on this cusp, on this kind of voyage of bad luck and DNFs. The last thing you want your driver doing is stewing for 4 weeks on a series of DNFs. So I think the good news is we turn it around quickly in Canada. Although, like both of you said, I don't know what this team's going to be able to do from a Frankenstein perspective to get a power unit in that car. You get a power unit in there, you have to recycle a turbo. How's that going to look from a performance perspective? Does that heighten the likelihood of another failure? Or do you have to stick in a new new turbocharger, and then you take a 10 place grid penalty like Tim described, and suddenly you're on the back foot once again? I think it must be incredibly frustrating for this driver. And then the other consideration too is, oftentimes I think when a driver finds themselves in this situation, you start looking around the grid. What would my life be like with this team? Or what would be my life be like with that team? Or would the grass be greener on the other side? And the reality is, he's arguably with the team that every driver that aspires to be in Formula One is already on. Like, he's with Ferrari. Like, this is where every driver ultimately wants to be in their career. And I think that must heighten the frustration and the disappointment a little bit more. But I think his management, his team is probably having some very frank conversations with Ferrari right now to try to understand how this can keep happening, because it's not just the reliability issue. It was the pit stop today, and it was strategy last week that this team seems to be failing in so many different ways. But Tim, to your point, psychologically, I really worry for his state of mind. He seemed to rebound in Spain. He rebounded obviously from Monaco, and I didn't know how he was going to do that. He rebounded so well that despite the fact that he was outperformed in Q1 and Q2 by his teammate Sainz, which was also great to see. It was great to see both of the Ferraris flourishing in the early rounds of qualifying. He still takes pole, and only to have it robbed again by the power unit failure.
And so, guys, I want to just maybe tie this conversation up and then move on to Mercedes and talk about some of the things we saw from them this weekend. But Tim, with all this drama, with all this misfortune that we've seen with Ferrari this year, how does that affect the dynamic within the team and relationships between drivers and engineers and the team principal? Like, I know that you said Charles just has to go in there and Carlos just has to go in there and just keep doing your job, be professional about it. But at some point, tempers are going to boil over. And we've all been there at some point, whatever situation. But when the stakes are this high, at some point, somebody's going to reach their limit. You're going to see the steams coming out of their ears, like in the old cartoons, right? So what can Ferrari do? I mean, like, the problems they have are one thing, but morale is another thing, completely different.
Absolutely. This is where Matteo Binotto comes in, and that's what he's going to get paid for, right? This is his job. He's got to come in here and he's got to cool everyone down. He's got to bring everyone back together as a team. I think that's something that he's actually done really well. That's one of the things that I have to really say that Matteo Binotto has done well since his time leading Ferrari here, is that he's done a really great job of just bringing everyone together as a team. The things that he does at the factory, from what I've heard, it's not so cutthroat in there anymore. People aren't so worried about their jobs anymore. I mean, there's more room for errors to happen and people to learn from that, which is in the past, under past management, hasn't been that way for Ferrari. And so things are a lot different there, which is a good thing. And I think that's where I was talking about with same with Matteo Binotto. It's just that, hey, we're having these DNFs. I got to keep doing what I'm doing, keep motivating everyone, keep everyone together. And that will help them get out of this funk that they're currently in.
So how does he do that? Is it pizza and movie night? Is it
Who knows,
wacky,
right?
Wacky hair day, trip to the water slides? Got to think outside the box here, I guess.
I think like one of the things is just making sure that you're learning where it's kind of like when a driver crashes, right? Everyone's always like, "Were you scared of crashing?" And it's like, well, not really. I mean, like, the thing is that, like, you have a crash and you learn why you crashed. And then once you've done that, then you don't get so scared the next time because you know why you crashed. So you learn from that. I think the same thing is here, is figure out why are we having reliability issues, figure out where it's coming from, and just try and fix it and learn from it and move on. And I have a feeling that that's pretty much how he'll deal with something, like this, is learning from the mistake. Where did the mistake start? How do you correct that mistake? And then we move forward type deal. But, I think like in terms of like team morale building, like he's pretty good at, like, Matteo Binotto's pretty good at that. Like, he's done a really nice job with this team. So yeah, I mean, who knows? It's probably going to be nothing, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, he'll just go and do what he's got to do to bring everyone together and make sure everyone doesn't stay down,
Yeah, exactly. Tough times at Baranello. Let's see how they turn it around. So now moving over to the other end of the pit lane, or maybe just a few garages up, let's talk about Mercedes. So this is an interesting one. George Russell outqualifies Lewis again. George qualified in fifth, and then Lewis was seventh, I believe, without looking at my notes. They come home third and fourth. Another podium for George, third of the season so far. I think he's looked pretty good. I mean, Lewis gets driver of the day. I don't think that there should be any question about that. I mean, there's maybe guys that maybe had some more highlight reel moments, but just considering what Lewis physically did to bring that car home in fourth, the bottoming out, the porpoising, and just the physical pain that he was in. I mean, I don't ever recall in this modern era of Formula One, or even going back through the years, even watching when I was a kid, watching a driver barely getting out of the car, like struggling to get out of the car in normal circumstances. Yes, you've seen it before when somebody's had a big shunt, they've had their bell rung, it takes them, a few moments to gather their senses and figure out where they are. But I mean, Lewis literally pulling himself out of the cockpit on the halo, sitting on the halo, and then walking really gingerly down the pit wall, down the pit lane. And that was just something I'd never seen before. And then Toto once again apologizing for the car. And then, subsequently Toto saying, maybe Tim, you can lend a little bit more color to this, that perhaps this is an issue, this back problem that he now has for the punishment that he's taken is maybe put into question whether or not we'll see Lewis in Montreal next week. But guys, something I never thought I would see. That was just a very strange moment. Yeah, and not a nice one to see.
Yeah, well, I think we'll be seeing Lewis in Montreal. I was on a Zoom call with Toto Wolff, and he assured us that there was going to be a reserve driver at the race, like there usually is. There's always one of them there. Nick DeVries is there, or Stoffel Van Dorn, who was there this past weekend. So yeah, I think there's always going to be a reserve driver around. The thing is that Lewis was running an experimental part on the race car this weekend, and that experimental part was actually the rear suspension. And so the direction that he went in was kind of like taking one for the team, kind of like, okay, I'll try it on my car and we'll see what happens, sort of deal. And so for him, it just didn't work. Like this new experimental part was the wrong thing. It didn't work out for them whatsoever, where George kind of just stuck to what he's been doing and just dragging absolute performance out of this car. Right. I mean, and for Lewis, he was telling us, that at the beginning on a high fuel load, like the car was trying to get away from him everywhere. I mean, there was points where there was high speed sections and he was literally having to lift off of the throttle because the car was literally trying to go into the wall. And so for him, I mean, this was a absolute like nightmare of a race. Like I could only imagine just how much this sucked to drive the entire time. That's why we got that message from Toto, following the race, calling it a bleep box car. I mean, he's not wrong. I mean, like when I watch back Lewis's onboard cameras, like it looks like a handful. It looks horrible to drive. But he reassured us, he was getting therapy done on his back. His trainer, Angela, was actually doing a lot of acupuncture and physiotherapy with him after every single session. But I mean, it's really bad when the driver actually has to stop free practice to literally can't do race runs and just, get out of the car and that's it, right? My day is over. I mean, that's crazy.
Totally. Look, go ahead. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I'm glad, Daly, you brought up the porpoising issue, because I think some of us felt that maybe Mercedes had solved this. And certainly after this weekend, we're beginning to see that this issue has not been resolved grid wide. And we heard Daniel Ricciardo post race saying that this was the first race weekend that he's ever experienced porpoising, and he doesn't wish it on anybody in the world. And that's significantly worse than anything he's experienced driving a race car. But I recall after qualifying, Lewis was in the media pen and he did acknowledge, like, look, there's a fix for porpoising. We lift the ride height and we stick on a stiffer floor. But in doing so, we significantly compromise performance. And he said the decision that we, the team, and he made was that we were going to lower the suspension as much as we could possibly do, and we were going to put on the most aggressive floor that generates the most downforce. And the net outcome of that is that they experience porpoising. And I think the challenge, though, for me is I see the drivers, and kind of thinking about this through a human lens, I'm genuinely worried about them. And, I saw a thread on Reddit earlier today, and they were summarizing all the comments from different drivers from team to team over the course of the last couple of weeks who had acknowledged issues. And, we saw commentary from Magnussen articulating that, hey, he feels he possibly has nerve damage from the porpoising issue. And George Russell talked about it after the race, and Lewis talked about it during the race, because we saw that radio message that, my back is killing me. Like, this isn't necessarily a good thing. And sometimes I wonder whether this is something that the FIA needs to regulate a little bit more closely. But then again, how do they regulate something that the teams can fix? They just don't want to fix it because it means compromising performance. But at the same time, I really feel for the drivers that are having to experience this. And, Lewis, after the race, was in the media pen, the bullpen, and they asked him about his experience today. And he said this was, without question, the most physically difficult race he's ever experienced. This is a guy with 296 Grand Prix in Formula One, the most physically damaging and challenging race he has ever been a part of. And, you said, Tim, he's going to be back there next week in Canada. Lewis, if nothing, is an absolute workhorse. He's a machine. He's going to be there. But that is an incredibly fast turnaround to get to Canada, to get rehabbed, and to get in that car on a power track where presumably this porpoising effect is going to resume very quickly.
Yeah, I just couldn't see him missing a race. You know what I mean? I just couldn't see it. Like, he's a real tough dude. So
yeah.
I honestly can't see that happening. But I mean, at the same time, you made an interesting remark, Hammy, about, the FIA getting involved here. And I mean, I think they are. I think one of the things that, I've heard them talking about is yes, trying to come up with a certain height for that ride height. But George actually said something in the post-race press conference. He said like they have the technology to solve this bouncing by a click of a finger. And you know what that sounded like to me? Active suspension.
Yes.
I don't want active suspension. Like that screams to me that like Mercedes, if they had active suspension, they'd have a killer car, right? Mm-hmm. But like, here's the thing. Active suspension was outlawed decades ago. Why would you bring it back? That makes zero sense. Find another way, because once we start getting active suspension, I don't know, guys, like it's not going to look fun. Like these cars aren't going to look like a handful. Like it's not going to look like the drivers are like really, really working hard. Like, come on, like active suspension in the middle of a corner. Like, give me a
Tim.
break.
It's interesting you make that point, and Daly, I'm going to interject real quick, but I think there's this widespread conspiracy theory on the internet right now that I don't give a lot of credence to, which is that Mercedes is doing everything they can to amplify the porpoising issue because they want to build a business case to reintroduce active suspension to Formula One. And, even if they introduce it as a spec part, so hey, it's not something that's customized and developed at the team level, I don't know how that works with the cost cap. And I think you would have a very hard time selling the smaller teams on introducing more cost and complexity, especially when the cost cap's going down to $135 million next year. And I also agree that while I've been a big advocate of active suspension in the past, and I think it's one of the most fascinating eras of Formula One, and the sports flirted with it a couple of times, I absolutely agree that is the ultimate driver aid, and it would absolutely take away the requirements of having a world-class driver in these cars.
100%.
Yeah.
Like 100%. Yep. That's why we're watching, right? We're watching because we want to see the best drivers in the world compete against each other. I mean, as soon as you get like automatic gearboxes, traction control, active suspension, I mean, why don't you just put a robot in the car at the end of the day and just let them drive the car? Because that's that's literally what you're trending. You're trending towards that. You don't want to trend towards that. You want to trend away, right? It's a sport.
Yeah.
It's a sport. And sorry, I get really heated about all this because I think if you're a team like Mercedes, if you've got to figure this out on your own, like you've got the budget to figure this out and go and do it. And at the same time, Lando Norris at the end of this race, when he was asked about all of this, like he didn't seem upset about it whatsoever. It was basically like, hey, we got it figured out. We're fine. They can figure it out too.
But that's why I found that the Daniel Ricciardo comments were so startling, because Daniel hasn't commented on porpoising all year. And I heard that comment from Lando. I'm like, okay, that it's good to know that there's certain teams on the grid that seem to have this solved. But this was also the first time that I've heard Daniel speak about it in such a meaningful, impactful way. It could also just be that the two of them had a very different approach to set up this race weekend as well. So they could have physically had different experiences in the car. But you're right. Mm-hmm. There's certainly some teams that have solved it. But certainly active suspension is not the correct mechanism to solve the porpoising issue. Sorry, Daly.
No, that's fine. The only thing I wanted to add to this discussion was, as cool as I think that active suspension was, I mean, it was banned for a reason, and I don't want it to see it brought back for exactly all the reasons that you guys outlined. I mean, they should be able to figure out a way to get past this. But I mean, having said that, I don't like to see like a guy like Lewis pulling himself out of the car. I don't like hearing stories like K-Mag saying that he's suffering like nerve damage, like on his arm and jaw and stuff like that. And then, guys like Carlos Sainz who are talking about that he's ultimately getting a little bit concerned about like any possible like medium and long-term health effects on the drivers. So,
but Daly, I mean, it doesn't. Yeah. But Daly, though, to play devil's advocate a bit, though, but
sure,
doesn't that just speak to like you can fix this problem?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Just raise the ride height. Like, they would lose performance, but the health of the driver would be okay.
But the thing is, if they're raising the ride height for everybody, then wouldn't theoretically everybody be, dealing with the same disadvantage? I guess in large part it's due to the design of the aero package and the floor and all that. So
what I'm getting at though is just that leave everything as it is. Yep. This is the car you made. This is what you've got, right? If you want to preserve the driver's health, raise the ride height. You know what I mean? Like, or fix it, one or the other. You know what I mean? Like that's it. I just don't. Yeah, these are the regulations. Stick to the regulations, right?
Yep.
We got these regulations for a reason, so we could have better racing. You don't want to mix up what they've already done because it looks like it's working. Like it actually is working. What they've decided to do here is working. So if teams are having issues, then isn't that on the teams? That's my question.
Totally.
That's fair.
I think you raise a really great point there. I mean, just to put a bow on this discussion, it'll be really interesting to see going into next year with the year behind us in these new regs. Will any teams have porpoising issues in 2023? Okay, before we close out the show, I do want to devote a couple of minutes just talk about the two Canadian drivers, Lance Stroll and Nick Latifi. But before we do that, I just want to really quickly go over an article that Mark linked to in the show notes. From the race.com. They had a list of winners and losers from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Among the winners were obviously Max Verstappen and George Russell, who we've already talked about. Included in their winners list was Pierre Gasly, Sebastian Vettel, and Danny Ricciardo. I think those are all solid shouts. I think that Sebastian, had he not had that bit of a moment going into T3, trying to pass Esteban Ocon, maybe at the end of the race, maybe he's mixing it up a little bit further up the road with Lewis Hamilton there. But I thought for Sebastian, I thought it was a very encouraging race. And Danny Ricciardo, okay, he got, where did he come home in the end? Was it 8th or 9th? No, it was 8th, I think it was, wasn't it? But I think that was a result that he needed. It was kind of interesting, though, that inter-team radio conversation going between Danny and his engineer and Lando and his engineer, just talking about the whole situation, trying to catch Fernando and possibly switching those cars around, and then Danny pulling ahead and kind of extending that gap between himself and his teammates. And but it was a good result, I think, for both of them. They got a good haul of points. I thought a good result for Pierre Gasly. I think he looked pretty racy at times. And then on the loser side, I don't think there's going to be any surprises here. The two on the top of the list, there were Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, and you can throw Carlos into the Ferrari basket there. And then the other losers that they have was Yuki Tsunoda, Kevin Magnussen. I mean, K-Mag, I think, is an easy one because, he had a pretty good start to the season, hasn't scored any points in, was it 4 races now? And, he's just been doing what he needed to do again today. A mechanical issue forced him out of this one. And then among their losers was also Alfa Romeo. They've kind of gone off the boil a little bit there as well. Is there anything that you guys would like to add to that?
I just want to talk about, Ricciardo for a sec and
Sure.
Gasly, because, Ricciardo in particular coming into this race weekend with just a ton of pressure on his shoulders, man. Like we're talking Zach Brown, like almost literally calling him out in the media at one point this season already. Like it was 2 races ago or maybe 3. But at the same time, it's like, he has to find a way of bouncing back. Hearing from him afterwards, it kind of sounds like they're starting to figure out a setup that kind of helps Daniel, because he has such an attacking style to the corner that it just doesn't work with these race cars. And that's so ingrained in his driving styles, just such attacking that apex or attacking that corner entry. And so for him, it's just trying to figure out how to get around that. I think for him in particular on that medium compound tire, he just couldn't keep up with Alonso in sector 3. And then obviously, like the Alpine's engine looks really good, man. And the Alpine is starting to look really good. Alonso looked like a friggin' rocket in sector 3, dude. No one was catching him. So even if Lando had have been allowed to get by, Danny Rick there towards the end to have a shot, there's no way. I think there's no way Lando was catching Alonso. He was way too fast on that start-finish straightaway. And as for Gasly, Sergio Perez gets that extension, in Monaco. And Hammy and I spoke about this on the pod. Gets that extension. And then you're thinking like, okay, well, what's going to happen with Sergio Perez? So coming into this race weekend, he needed this, I think, to just show that, Pierre Gasly is back. Because at the end of the day, this AlphaTauri is just so far this season, it's not great. Okay, this isn't like a great race car that AlphaTauri's kind of come up with here. Gasly had his best qualifying performance so far this season. And then obviously the P5 finish is for him incredible. And I think that's going to help his driver stock, going forward for him, because it's kind of like, okay, how long do you want to hang around at AlphaTauri, knowing that you are a really good driver and knowing that this car isn't even all that great. I mean, think about it. He only did one stop and he had to keep, I believe it was the hard tire compound he jumped onto at the end. He had to keep that alive for however many laps that was. I mean, it was forever, right? So, I mean, yeah, shout out to Pierre Gasly because he drove one hell of a race today.
Just to add on to that Gasly piece as well, at this point last year, he'd had 6 points finishes and a podium. This was just his 3rd points finish of the year. It was by far his best finish. And obviously, AlphaTauri is still working with his car, and I think there's an adjustment period for him. But I think this was psychologically a really important race result for him. Post-race as well, he was talking about the fact that he'll be traveling with Max to Canada. So they're going to fly out Baku, and then they're going to travel to Canada together on one of the Red Bull jets. And I think it's good for him to be around Max and talk about race experience and setup and things like that. Like, I think that's a good place for him to be and a good person to surround himself with over the next couple of days.
Okay, guys, I just wanted to add one more quick comment here. I think one thing that maybe flew under the radar here, the 2 Alpine cars, Fernando Alonso coming home P7 and Esteban Ocon P10. I think maybe that didn't get mentioned, a solid outing for both of them. And then just quickly, guys, your thoughts on a very, very poor weekend from both of our Canadian drivers, Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi. Who wants to take that one? I mean...
Sammy's furiously pointing at me. I mean, I think we'll start with Lance. I mean, at the end of the day, that Monaco, we go back to Monaco, right? It just doesn't have that mess up in Q1. I think for him, that's a definite Q3 appearance. But then once we get here to Baku and starts, it all starts in qualifying, right? And then has that square on with the wall. And he's asking the team, like, if the front wing is okay, right? He's literally saying, should I pit? And the team's like, no, you shouldn't. We think you're going to be all right. So then he's like, okay, starting a push lap and sends it in there. And obviously broke way too late on cold tires. I don't think those tires had enough heat in them and just destroyed the entire race car. Well, not the entire race car. I shouldn't blow that one out of proportion. Took the front corner off of it. He's not having a good season. Lance is just not having a good season right now. Frustrated. This is a car that's actually starting to look quite decent. Sebastian Vettel's dragging the performance out of it. So the performance is there. And I think for Lance, that's got to be very frustrating to see. And same thing for him, just got to keep going back to whatever was working. You can't deviate from the things that are working. So you got to stick with that process and eventually you'll come out on top. But having a new car essentially come through in the middle of the season is really difficult. You need to have a lot of experience to know how to handle that, which Sebastian Vettel does and Lance just doesn't. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think for him, he's got to get this thing back on track because it's just not going well. I think he's got that car to get the points, to get what he needs. So for him, it's just, you got to stay focused, man. Over to Nicholas. I mean, I think one of the things for Nicholas, and everybody's going to crap all over him anyways, and probably crap all over me too for saying it, but the performance is starting to come. It's not like he's, seconds off of Alex anymore. Like he's a few tenths, which is good to see. That means that he's getting a little bit more comfortable with this race car. They haven't even brought any new upgrades to this race car, like nothing serious or major. And so I think once that starts to happen, hopefully that gives Nicky a bit more confidence and he's able to try and take this thing to the limit, because it's a place that he hasn't really been to with this car yet, is taking it to the limit. And so I think for him, he just needs to have a good race where it kind of just boosts that confidence. The penalty that he got off the top, that was actually a crew member that had pushed him back past the yellow mark line that drivers use to line their tires up for their grid spot, pushed him back. And then it appeared that it pushed him back a little bit too far. So the crew member came back over, and it's 15 seconds before, I believe, the formation lap starts, that you can't even touch the car. And this guy was like, he had just done it at the 15-second mark. and moved him forward. And that's what caused him to get that 10-second penalty. And then the next one was for ignoring blue flags, which is fair enough. He was. I mean, I saw the video. So, yeah. Definitely got that 5-second time penalty for sure. But I mean, it's tough for Nicholas. I mean, every day after every race, it kind of seems like I'm hearing about someone else coming in and replacing him mid-season. Dieter Rankin actually just posted an article that Oscar Piastri could replace him coming into the British Grand Prix. That's news to a lot of us, so we'll have to see how that plays out. I have a feeling that's not going to happen, but this is Formula One, and who knows?
Anything can happen.
anything that will happen can happen, sort of deal. But coming into Canada, he's super excited. So is Lance. I spoke to both of them, and they're jacked up to come to Canada, obviously, and finally get a home race for both drivers. Obviously, competing around Europe, I mean, you don't get that opportunity to really race in home races, and I've raced in enough home races to know how that feels, and it feels pretty good. So who knows? Maybe them coming back home will help turn their seasons around.
Cool. Hey guys, let's delve into the mailbag now. I know that we've got a bunch. So who's got the mailbag? I know it's not on this side of the desk. So
sure,
okay.
I'll take that one from
okay, cool.
At F1IMI. Bouncy cars and long-term health conditions. Adjusting ride height is clearly not the solution. How about suspension? Ferrari engine problems. Also, Red Bull seems to have small issues that they are clearly guarding. And with a little bit of crossed fingers, will this come back to bite them towards the end of the season? I mean, there's a lot packed into that question. Let's tackle the health conditions. I mean, because we kind of touched on it with Lewis and then Daniel Ricciardo as well. And, George has actually also been one of those drivers who's really been beating that drum. And a lot of it's not really muscular anymore, right? It's more skeletal. It's more in the spine, right? And that's one of the things that Toto Wolff had said to us following the race on Sunday. And I think like for that portion, that's serious. I mean, I know I have had spinal injury as well that's been caused from racing, and it's just long-term damage that's in there now because of it. So it's definitely something that they have to take a look at. But I don't know. What are you going to do, right? I mean, these are the regulations that have been given. And like I was saying earlier, if the teams can adjust the suspensions and fix these things, and they probably should. Hammy, Ferrari engine problems, and also Red Bull seems to have small issues that they are clearly guarding.
Yeah, I want to add quickly just on that comfort piece, the health and safety related to the porpoising. Let's just be very clear that no race car is even remotely comfortable. Like I haven't competed in competitive open wheel racing, but I used to take my car to the track and, you'd put on your ultra stiff sidewalled R compound tires and you drop your coilovers and you dial in the dampers until it was as stiff as you can imagine. And it was incredibly painful and you couldn't wait to get the car off the track and undo all of the race configuration that you set up. And again, this is a road car that's being configured for track purposes. Like none of these cars are comfortable, but it does alarm me ultimately that, hey, there could be some skeletal or nervous system issues. But to your point, the regulations are clear and the teams need to, in fact, you've kind of sold me on this conceptually a little bit, Tim, because I was very much on the sense that the FIE needs to step in and regulate this. But you're right. The teams all have a fix. They just don't want to apply that fix because the fix is either A, you raise the ride height of the car and you put on a stiffer floor and you compromise performance, or you put pressure on your factory to come up with a more long-term solution that doesn't compromise performance. And clearly some teams have been able to do the latter, including Red Bull, who seem to be having no issues. They've got phenomenal pace and they don't have the bouncing and porpoising issues. In terms of the Ferrari reliability issue, I think the challenge is that the reliability isn't related to one specific thing. Like early in the season when Red Bull were struggling with reliability, we were able to isolate it principally to the fuel cell, right? It was fuel pump. It was things within the fuel bladder. They were able to identify those issues. Fortunately, in those cases, those were all spec parts. And I think it was more bad luck. So not something that they had to go back and re-engineer. I think in the case of Ferrari, you look at today, like one of the issues was a power unit. The other was hydraulic. related. And you look at the back of Carlos Sainz's car today, it was just covered, just plastered in hydraulic fluid. Those are two very distinctly and totally unrelated issues. Like, that's not a good thing. If every single issue went back to the MGUH or the MGUK, that's great. Pool your resources, identify a fix and address it. But when your reliability issues are related to different things, that's hugely problematic for everyone back at the factory, because now you've got to take the resources that you have, which are fewer than you've ever had before because of the cost cap. And then you also need to take your kind of minute financial resources, because you've got a cost cap, and you've got to decide how we're going to address these and which ones take priority. So I don't know. As for the Red Bull comments, that one's maybe a little bit new to me. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, that one's interesting. I mean, out of everything, I don't really have any other points to add to what you guys have already covered on the other two topics. But the thing is, isn't everybody dealing with like little gremlins and little issues? And ultimately, if these are little things, little issues that they're dealing with, it's not costing them pace. It's not costing them position. They're not having to retire the cars. So probably from that point of view, and this is just me speculating and thinking out loud here, maybe there's a little less urgency for them, or they can, they're not crucial because, or maybe they are crucial, but they're able to deal with them because it's not like a massive, double DNF like we saw in Bahrain, or like Ferrari saw today at Azerbaijan. So, everybody's going to have something. I mean, it's a long year. These cars are incredibly complex, and to assume that these cars work 100% of the time, I think is a little bit of wishful thinking. I think somebody's always going to be dealing with something, either with aero, with mechanics, whatever the case may be. But that one was a bit of news to me as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're dealing with that. All right, next question, sir.
At SR5450, is the season over? ? Mercedes will continue to catch up, but too little, too late.
I think
season over.
I think we hand this one off and pass that one straight over to Maranello and say, hey guys, what do you think of this? What say you? I sure hope not. I mean, of course I kid. And I mean, we're third of the way through the season now. And I would just be really disappointed if it was just a real flash in the pan, because the thing is that Ferrari, it is a competitive car. It's a good car. And to see them struggle like this, I mean, if you're a Ferrari fan, if you're a Ferrari driver or anyone in that team, you must be, as we talked about off the top of the show, so frustrated right now because they know the performance is there. So I sure hope they can get it turned around, because not that I particularly have anything against Red Bull or Max or Sergio winning the title. I just want to see somebody push them for it. And, I just don't want to be talking about 2022 and Ferrari maybe about the same way we talk about 2018 and Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari, that conversation that was a season, a championship that he should have really had more of a say in. And that I think to me is one that kind of got away from him.
Hammy, do you think the season is over?
Yeah, I just want to build on that point that Daly made, that I think 2018 looms very large in the rearview mirror of regret for Maranello, because that was a championship that they probably could have and should have secured, and it fell
Same
apart for them in the
2017
back
as well.
half of that season.
2017 as well.
2017, man. Like we talk about this reign of Mercedes dominance for 7 years. There was a team that had an opportunity to throw in some disruption there, and they failed to do it. I don't want to think it's over purely and selfishly from a business perspective. If this championship's wrapped up by the summer break, we all see our podcast ratings crater because everyone checks out. And selfishly, I don't want that to happen. Last year, from a business perspective, couldn't have been better because people were invested until the last race. So, I'm going to be an optimist on this one. I can't imagine that their bad luck and their reliability issues are going to persist. You got to think that at some point, Red Bull is going to have a little bit of bad luck. Mercedes has had a ton of good luck. They haven't had a retirement yet. They brought the car home in every single race. So I think that I don't think it's over, but I think it's dangerously close. And maybe we revisit this question after 5 Grand Prix when we're going to the summer break. If the Delta's still 80 points at the summer break, then it'll be tough to imagine a scenario where they can close that gap. But if they can get that down to 40 or 50 points, and hey, we've got a battle on our hands in the second half of the season.
Great point.
At Sean is a mess.
Gotta love these Twitter handles.
Yeah, this isn't really a question; it's more of a statement. But Mercedes has the most reliable engine at this point? Well observed. Over to at Bengals Bubbles. Oh my God.
Bengals Bubbles. Shout out.
This may be a question to start off with you, Hammy, but it's a long one. So bear with me. With more drivers training with sims, so simulators, do you think car development is being more geared towards improvements based on data and sightline for young drivers like Lando Norris, and less on how the car feels for the development of guys like Ricardo, aka sacrificing feel for performance, with the exception that I'm sure they both felt and saw how slow they were in the straights today. LOL.
I'm gonna pull a Tim Hauraney here. So yesterday I was talking to young driver Matt Clark, and of course in your case it would be Total Wolff or President Obama or Jay-Z. But yesterday I was talking to talented young racer Matt Clark, who's of course aspiring to become an IndyCar driver, and we were actually talking about the prevalence and the role of simulators in racing today. And he was talking to the fact that going into the pandemic, when drivers couldn't be around their teams and they couldn't amass a crew and go to a track for testing, simulators became incredibly important. And I think that's now permeated through all levels of racing. And I think all drivers have a sim in their home. They're all using iRacer. They can look at individual data. They can experience tracks. They can take different cars to different tracks to experience different conditions, blah, 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 blah. But I think the other thing that's really important here is, given where Formula One is from a cost perspective today, they simply have to rely on simulators because they can't get these guys into the cars more than 2 times a year for testing. Like, you have 2 filming days spread throughout the season. You maybe have 6. This year we had 6 days of preseason testing. Really, next year is probably going to be 3. Like, you go back 15 years ago in the era of big cigarettes in Formula One, like, you had a dedicated testing team. You had a crew of mechanics that were traveling the globe within a dedicated car just for testing. Like, you don't get that luxury anymore because of the way that they manage the economics of the sport. So I think simulators are incredibly important. I don't remember what the question was. It was really good, Tim. So I'll kick it back to you if you want to build anything onto my my indirect rant.
No, it's pretty good, man. We'll move on. At I've been Yuki'd. I don't get that handle. By the way,
I'll explain it to you. I'll explain it to you off the air.
What about Lando and his questioning team orders at the end? Question mark. DR. So Daniel Ricciardo did him a solid earlier in the race when he had more pace and team orders were given. Lando Norris is dropping in my likability index.
Well, I think that's just Lando, although he comes across like pretty nice and pretty personable, like out of the car, is just showing a little bit of that killer instinct when he's in the cockpit. It's just like,
definitely,
you got to do what it takes to win, and if that means you want your teammate out of the way, you think that you're faster. I think he's just looking out for himself, and I think as a racing driver, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. You don't want the guy in the car to be a pushover.
Yeah, I mean, you can't listen. You can't always be nice, okay? And you can't be nice on the track. These guys aren't your friends. I mean, you're out there to battle and do your best. And for the position that Lando's in, I mean, he was a team first sort of guy today. I mean, he did get radioed and got given instructions, and he even said afterwards that he was following team orders and trying to be a good teammate. At the end of the day, I think this was a battle for third place. Or podium spot, or if it was a battle, in the championship of some kind, then I think we would have seen a more aggressive Lando Norris. And yes, he should be. That's very important. At Gary C. Blaney, why don't they just ban porpoising and penalize those that choose to run with it? Hammy?
Yeah, I think we answered this question a little bit earlier on, right? Which is, the regulations are established, they're defined, and ultimately teams are choosing, in some cases collaboratively with their drivers, to run setups that amplify the effect of porpoising, like we talked about earlier. Raise the ride height, put on a stiffer floor, the porpoising goes away. I think I have some sympathy for the drivers, because I don't think any driver is ever going to resist the temptation of having a faster setup. I feel bad for them, but at the same time, I think the pressure needs to be on their team just to build a solution that's more permanent and sustainable than lifting the ride height or allowing their drivers to be subjected to those really negative forces to their skeletal and nervous systems.
Mm-hmm.
That's everything from the mailbag. Back to you, Daly.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. There was not a lot of action at the front of the track, the front of the running order today, but I mean, surprisingly, when you break it down, there's a lot of different storylines going on. I just hope, as Hammy said, that we can perpetuate the interest in this season, and that I want to see more fight back from Ferrari. I hope they can really pull it together going into Canada next weekend, which is going to be great. I mean, we're all really excited for this one. First home Grand Prix, first Canadian Grand Prix since 2019. Who would have thought, guys? But I mean, hey, we had this little thing called COVID in between, but it's awesome to see that we're going to be back in Montreal. It's going to be great to see the new facilities there, and it's going to be great to see those cars running around Ile de Notre Dame, which we have not seen in far too long. Really excited for it. So on behalf of myself, Mr. Mark Hamilton, and Tim Hauraney, thank you for joining in. Take care, guys. We'll talk to you again really, really soon. Bye for now.